Zwier, and we hope you'll be able to stick with us for the entire time. Today's topic is youth, depression, and suicide, and it's presented by June Zwier and Winnie Visser. They're both joining us today from Ontario. Winnie, I'm going to let you get us started.
Hello, everyone. I'm Winnie Visser from Brighton, Ontario, and I'm with June Zwier from Bowmanville, Ontario. We are both marriage and family therapists, as well as having mental health backgrounds in our previous jobs.
And I'm June. I'm going to tell you about Faith and Hope Ministries very briefly. It's a part-time ministry funded by our home classis, which is Classis Quinte in Ontario. And our purpose is to help churches learn how to care, support, value, and include their members and families who are affected by mental illness. And you can see more on our website, faithandhopeministries.net. So we'd like to start by giving you an overview of what we hope to accomplish in this short period of time. We have three main objectives, which we are hoping we will meet with you. One is awareness. We want to be aware or recognize a normal teen behavior in development. That's very important. And then what might be some signs or warning signs of or symptoms of depression. We also want to spend time acknowledging that depression and suicide are happening to our teens, and we need to learn how to respond well, better understand it so we can respond well. And thirdly, we're going to spend some time on action because it requires some action and some knowledge of what we can do and who we can refer to.
And June, I'm going to pop in briefly. The audience listening, and your voice is just a little soft, so if you could perhaps adjust upward. Thanks.
So before we explore what to do with depression and suicide in youth, we need to know what normal teen development is. As parents, we often ask, is my teen normal? If we don't say it out loud, we certainly say it internally to ourselves. Teen years are a time of growth and development and a very confusing times for parents and teens alike. There's a major brain development that happens between birth and 2 years, and then it levels out for a few years, and then in the teen years, chemicals are added, and there's another huge development that happens in the prefrontal cortex. Teens have changes in their thinking. They learn abstract thinking. Their thinking becomes deeper and more complex, and they think about what they are thinking. That's actually a term. And they have a renewed gain of self-ego. Remember the terrible twos when the toddler says, that's mine? While the teenager begins to think that others are always thinking about them. For example, we've all heard teens say, everyone is going to see the zit on my face. Or, no one understands me. They question their beliefs and they think they know everything. What the ideal friend is, what the ideal parent is, or what the ideal church should be like, and they have a real nose for hypocrisy. They go through emotional changes where they become increasingly passionate about things. There's increased intensity of sadness, crying, or happiness. Emotional regulation is not fully developed yet, and they also have ideals for friendships. Friends mean a lot to teens, and so these are the normal growth development changes that teens go through as their brain develops. The other day, though, I was on Facebook, believe it or not, and I read an ad that explains this developmental stage. It said, teenagers, are you tired of being harassed by your dumb parents? Act now. Move out, get a job, pay for your own bills, and do it while you still know everything. Kind of a humorous way. I hope all of you are kind of giggling about that, but they certainly think that this is a place where their development and they think they know things. Seriously, though, along with normal development, we need to look at adolescent needs as well. We come into this world equipped with a basic need for attachment and for relationships. Insecure attachments cause teens to shut off all people, and trust is really hard to come by. Children are born with the need for competence. They try to walk, they fall down, they get up again. Unfortunately, though, we have protected our kids so much, our children so much, that they don't learn important skills of resilience, but rather have a fear of failure. One example of this is when we buy trampolines for our children. We put the nets up around the trampoline so that instead of learning to control their jumping, they rely on the net to save them. They don't learn the skill of self-regulation. Also, increasingly, children who have a best friend or are possessive of a special toy or blankie grow to have strong sense of identity when they get older. Identity and belonging are extremely important. So the next two slides will show the adolescent brain in a bit of a more humorous way, but it does get the point across.
So as we mentioned, there are two major developmental spurts of the brain. And at the teenage years, making mistakes is part of how the brain grows. The final part of the brain to grow, which is called the prefrontal cortex, is the part that makes us capable of planning, setting priorities, organizing our thoughts, suppressing impulses, weighing the consequences, all the things we would like our teens to have. But that part of the brain is not matured yet. So the part that makes them more responsible isn't there yet. The part responsible for them seeking sensations, emotions, and excitement, it's pictured as the love lobe on this one, the limbic system, is very active, and it's turned on in the teen years. So the best estimate of when the brain is fully developed is around 25 years old. So if we look at the normal brain and the development, it's the judgment that we really wanted our teens to have isn't there yet. It's the last to develop. So here you see it takes well into their 20s for the judgment portion of the brain to become mature. And the executive functions like thinking, planning, organizing, problem solving, emotional or behavioral control, personality, and judgment are not there yet in the teenage years. So it's normal for them to respond irresponsibly, or if they're unable to control their emotions. That's a normal teenage phase. However, the statistics on this slide answer the question of why do we even have to be concerned about depression and suicide in teens. So let's look at some of the facts. 1 in 5 teens live with a mental health condition. 50% of mental health conditions emerge by age 14 and 75% by 24. A high percentage of high school students living with mental health conditions drop out. And suicide is the third leading cause of death for youth and young adults. And unfortunately, less than half of youth with mental health conditions receive treatment. So we do need to acknowledge this and be able to understand it better. And we need to know it's not a respecter of anyone. It happens at different ages. It happens for boys and girls. And depressed children they show signs of persistent sadness, apathy, and irritability. So youth and depression. Let's look at youth specifically. Young women have a higher rate than young men. About 15 to 20% of teens will experience depression at some time. That's the 1 in 5. Adolescent depression is often undiagnosed, and that's why we're looking at making sure we understand what's normal and what might not be, what's a warning sign. So if we look at the normal versus warning signs, we all know that teens are moody and there's periodic moodiness. But if this is constant, that's a warning sign. Or teens get bored. I'm bored. But if they're not at all seeing even the point of trying something, then it's a warning sign. There's a decrease in motivation, often in teens, but apathy all the time is not normal. They feel low about themselves, low self-esteem, but feeling worthless, wrong, or just bad most of the time is not normal. Lack of focus, we know that happens, but the actual inability to concentrate is a warning sign of depression. Sleeping and eating changes. We know teens sleep long or eat strange, but sleeping all the time or eating uncontrollably or not at all is a warning sign. Processing mortality, they do talk about death, but if they're talking about wanting to die, that's a warning sign. And then feeling down at times. All teens have this. But if they're feeling hopeless and lost and helpless, there's no way out, that is a warning sign.
One of the serious mental health complications in youth and young adults may be the onset of psychosis. So psychosis is a serious mental illness. It affects the brain that changes the way a person thinks and feels and can lead to a significant loss of touch with reality. It is a medical condition that can happen to anyone. However, those in the teen to young adult age are more susceptible. No one knows for sure what causes psychosis, but most people believe that a biological risk for the disease interacting with a combination of genetic and biological factors, substance abuse, drug and alcohol use, and stress can all be contributing factors to the development of psychosis. The symptoms for psychosis that we have listed here are not exhaustive, but we thought we'd include this in our talk today because it might be helpful to know this as youth leaders or for families with teens. Symptoms of psychosis are actually divided into positive and negative symptoms. So the positive symptoms are new behaviors that are not usually seen in healthy people, such as believing things that don't make sense, hearing or seeing things that are not there, being unable to think straight, being emotionally disturbed or anxious or agitated, trying to seem very important, being untrusting and guarded or feeling watched. And lastly, they may act unfriendly and show ill feelings towards one another. The negative symptoms then are a loss of usual behaviors, and such as skills that lack, so they'll lack interest in doing things that are normally considered important. There's a lack of energy or desire to do anything, even simple tasks. They're really absorbed in one's own thoughts and senses. They lack normal feelings and being less responsive to others. They have strong attitudes and beliefs that may seem unreasonable to others, or have difficulty with abstract thinking and having movement that are slowed down or stopped. So once again, we thought we would add this because it's really helpful to know this as youth leaders and families. So we thought we'd list the 10 common warning signs of a mental health condition. These are general signs that we need to watch out for. So there's a feeling of sadness, withdrawn, but the time is for about 2 weeks straight, and then we need to. That's a warning sign. Being seriously trying to harm or kill oneself, or making plans to do so. The whole thing about making a plan is very, very important to note. They could have severe or out-of-control risk-taking behaviors that can cause harm to oneself or others, driving a car really quickly down the road, just all kinds of different risk-taking behaviors. A sudden, overwhelming fear for no reason, all of a sudden in a huge panic. And then, as June said, not eating, where they could have significant weight loss or weight gain, but also throwing up or using laxatives to lose weight is also a warning sign. So to continue that, they may have severe mood swings that cause problems in relationships. Right? We said already that it was normal to have intense feelings, so these problems could cause, these things could cause problems in relationships. Repeated use of alcohol or drugs, a drastic change in behavior or personality or sleeping habits. So where a person might have been a very kind person and thinking about others might all of a sudden become mean and angry and not wanting to have anything to do with anyone. Extreme difficulty in concentrating or staying still. So focus is really hard. I can't do my homework. I can't sit still enough to do my homework. And then intense worries or fears that get into the way of daily activities. So to emphasize the warning signs spoken by teens by themselves, we want to turn this over now to Kim and show you a short video.
Okay, and I would just like to caution our audience, not against the video, but for those of you who have needed to increase your volume in order to hear Winnie and June, it may be that when the video starts to play, you will experience a very loud burst of noise. So I want you to be ready with your mouse and cursor on your volume controls as we begin this video today. I don't want you to be blasted out of your seats. So here we go.
Mental health conditions are more common than you may think. 1 in 5 youth or young adults lives with a mental health condition. Do you know the warning signs? Like feeling sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks. Severe mood swings that cause problems in relationships. Intense worries or fears that get in the way of daily activities. Sudden overwhelming fear for no reason. Or seriously trying to harm or kill oneself, or making plans to do so. Not eating, throwing up, or using laxatives to lose weight. Significant weight loss or weight gain. Severe, out-of-control risk-taking behavior that can cause harm to self or others. Repeated use of drugs or alcohol. Drastic changes in behavior, personality, or sleeping habits. Or extreme difficulty concentrating or staying still. If you see these signs in yourself or a friend, tell a trusted adult. The first step to getting help is to say it out loud.
So as the video makes it clear with all the pictures, you could see the distress on the teens' faces. We really do need to be aware of the warning signs for mental health issues in our youth. So Kim, let's turn it over to you right now, and we'll see if anyone in the audience might have some questions for us.
As a matter of fact, we do have a question. One of our audience members is wondering, how do you define depression, and what is a biblical perspective or understanding of depression?
Do you want to take that, Jim?
I can take this one, sure. Defining depression, you have to have these symptoms for at least 2 weeks, so it's got to be a period of time where you're feeling the symptoms we noted that are not normal. So it has to be an extended period of time, because all of us can be blue for a day or, a couple days. But if it's 2 weeks going with some of these symptoms, and they say 5 to 6 of these symptoms are what will give the diagnosis of depression, the person needs to see a doctor. The person needs to get help and get some treatment. And the second part of that question, can you repeat that for me, Kim?
And what is a biblical perspective or understanding of depression?
Okay. That answer could take a long time. We could do a whole series on that. But a biblical perspective is there is many people in the Bible who have experienced depression. David and Elijah and Jesus at times felt really low, so the suffering is part of our existence, not part of what God wants for us, but it's part of our existence. And lament it's good to lament sometimes. We need to be open. The Psalms do that, putting our emotions out there. So, but also a biblical perspective is that as Jesus did, we need to walk alongside of people who are hurting this way, and not necessarily can we fix it in any way, but the journey with them is very important. And the Word of God is important, although when someone is depressed, it's very hard for them to get into the Word or prayer, so we need to help them to do that or do that for them. Yeah, that's a very quick synopsis. There's a lot more that could be said about that.
Okay, so do I hear you volunteering to do another webinar on the topic of biblical? I think not. That's the last of our questions for now, and I'm going to turn it back over to Winnie to get us into the next segment of our webinar.
So we can't talk about depression in youth without also talking about suicide, because sometimes teen depression turns deadly. So here are some of the Canadian statistics, because we have both American and Canadian people here with us in our webinar, so we will do both. So this one is the Canadian statistics for youth and suicide. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth aged 10 to 24 years. It's quite a span, but boy, is it ever young when it starts. Males complete suicide 3 to 5 times more often than females. Oftentimes, that is because they have access to more lethal means. And adolescent females are 4 to 7 times more likely to attempt suicide than adolescent males. Sobering statistics. The American statistics, they state that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death. It is the 3rd leading cause of death for those aged 15 to 24 years, which is a little bit different than our Canadian stats. Approximately 4,600 lives are lost each year to youth suicide, and 157,000 youth receive medical care for self-inflicted injuries. Cutting and self-harm can be prevalent in youth, and due to a variety of issues, but it's not always a sign of suicide. It is certainly a sign that the youth is in emotional pain and does need attention. We won't elaborate on this because that could take a whole other webinar to talk about that topic, and no, not yet, Kim. So we'll go on to the warning signs of suicide. So as there's warning signs for general mental health issues or depression, there's also warning signs for suicide. And yet, oftentimes we miss these. So learning more about these warning signs is really important, and yet we need to remember too that suicide cannot always be prevented. So a warning sign of suicide is that there have been previous attempts. So if a youth has already tried before, then they are at higher risk. If they have verbal threats of suicide, if they're threatening, they have a recent suicide of somebody else that they know, there's a preoccupation with death, there's a marked change in personality, so that's similar to the depressed. There's a sudden change in sleeping and eating habits. And again, there's a significant drop in school or work responsibilities. There's a loss of interest in usual activities. They don't want to do their extracurricular activities. They don't want to hang with their friends. They don't want to, they don't want to do their chores anyways, but then it's even harder because they literally can't. They socially withdraw. They just hibernate kind of in their rooms. And this one too, there's no concern for appearance. They don't care if their hair is washed, if they what kind of clothes they have. There's just no concern there at all. So those are the warning signs for risk of suicide.
So we do truly need to stop and acknowledge these warning signs. We need to be aware of them so we can look out for them. There's also lapses of attention and concentration where they just really can't concentrate. There could be dangerous or illegal activities, risky things, running away, drugs, alcohol, substance abuse. Recent rejection, we do need to take their breakup seriously. It can really hurt, and it can be a warning sign for watching out for this teen. Giving or throwing away prized possessions. That's an interesting one, but it is a sign that they're thinking ahead and taking action on something, so they're giving all their possessions away. Explosive outburst, very angry. If they're not usually angry, but being explosively angry. Of course, possession of any dangerous weapons. We need to stop and acknowledge that and do something about that. And finally, unexplained cheerfulness after depression, which sounds strange, but it is a fact that this happens because they're feeling like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I've got some action planned, and it's going to be better. So they may be sounding cheerful because they're ready to act. So what do we do about all this? And that's, I'm sure, what most of you want to know. How do we respond to this? And one thing to start with is to ask ourselves questions, and then to look at the action that's needed, depending on the answer. So we have talked about, is this normal teen development? Is my teen just going through something that's normal, or the young person that I'm with? Or is it depression, given some of the warning signs we gave you and some of the ideas about diagnosis? Is it suicide? We need to be able to sort of acknowledge that and see if that's what's going on. So how do I know? Well, we get the information. We work hard on knowing those signs, which is what we're hoping to help you to do. And then what do I do? That's where the action comes in that we want to go over with you. So first of all, basic action is always ask. We may be afraid to ask because we think, oh, I can't ask about suicide, or I can't ask about depression. That's going to make it worse. No, in fact, if you ask, the person is much more willing to talk about it because they realize you can handle it, and it's okay to talk about. So it's not going to increase their risk for suicide or depression. And then we need to listen. Fundamental to any support we provide youth is listening, right? Listen very attentively without judging, as they get a lot of judgment, challenging or becoming angry or shocked. You need to, try and stay calm, even though this is really hard. You're trying to stay calm and be with them. And we like the acronym LEAP. It helps us to remember how to do this, which is listen. We have to listen much more than we talk. Empathize. Try and help them realize you're trying to put yourself in their situation. Agree how okay, I get it. You're feeling this awful. This is not good. And then partner with them to do something about it, to actually work together so that they know you're there for them. And, of course, it's different. It might be a bit different if we do sort of determine, there's enough warning signs here about depression, then we need to take action. We can't just decide, this will go away or do nothing. We need to take action. So remind the youth you're there for them and you're happy to help them, so that you are extending that hand and that relationship. It is all about relationships as well. Find out the help that's available in your area, the resources. This needs to be done ahead of time so that you have a good idea and your church has a good idea what's out there to help youth with mental health problems or with suicide. Help the youth reach out then to the appropriate resources. So you do it in partnering and helping them to find those resources. And then stay involved, connected. Again, that relationship is so important. Don't drop them once they're getting some help. You need to know the crisis lines in your area, and you need to know it's going to be quite difficult for them to tell their parents or, get help from a doctor or a professional. So they need your help to do that. And going on, if the person is suicidal or they're giving the warning signs that they're suicidal that we've talked about, again, action is needed. So we need to take it seriously and reassure them you're there for them, again, that you're not afraid of this, that you can handle it and you're going to stick with them. Again, find out ahead of time the help that's available. What are the crisis lines? What are the services in your community that you can use in the time of crisis? Contact the resource with the youth if possible. So you do it together, partner, and just help them along. But if they're not willing to do it, contact the resource on your own. Safety is the ultimate issue here. You may be saving a life. You don't need their permission. You don't keep this a secret. If all else fails, you call 911 to get them the help they need. The team may be upset with you, but they will be alive. Follow up, again, stay involved, stay connected, keep that relationship going so they know they can count on you.
So then we thought we would suggest some tips on how not to react and how to respond when suicide is a possibility for youth. Some of these things we've already said, and some of them are new. So we've said, in the sense of suicide, do take all threats seriously. Sometimes kids just say, I just want to die, and we just need to check in on that and ask them what they mean by that. Do notice signs of depression. Are they low, withdrawn? Do be concerned if there's a loss of a loved one, even a pet, or even a loss of self-esteem. Sometimes bullying is involved here as well, and that can really pummel one's self-esteem. Just take those things seriously. Do trust your own judgment. If you have a gut sense that this is not safe for the youth, then you need to act. Do tell appropriate people. That means if I guess that means appropriate people would be possibly their parents or possibly a trusted adult, or it might mean taking them to a therapist or a professional or a doctor. What you don't want is gossip to say, well, do you know what so-and-so did? Those are things that are not appropriate. Don't ignore or explain away suicidal comments. Call them on it, because it's not something to take lightly. And they don't need to play around with that kind of language either. Don't explain away sudden behavior changes either. Again, ask them about that. Don't think that the youth will get over it. It's not, and simply ignore it. Ask them. Also, don't be misled. Sometimes when people are suicidal, they might, in front of you, say that everything's okay, and yet you see in their behavior something is not. And don't keep a confidence or a secret or worry that you might be overreacting or look silly if you need to call 911 or take them to the hospital or whatever. That is a lifesaver. So when a youth will say, "You got to promise you don't tell anybody," you need to just be comfortable saying, "Well, you can tell me, but I can't promise. I'd like you to tell me, but I can't promise that I will. It just depends on what you're going to tell me, that I can keep that a secret or not." If they're going to be unsafe with themselves, then you can't do that. Do express your concern to the youth. Tell them that you value them. Do, if safety permits, remove the means of suicide. If they have a bottle of pills in their hands or something like that, try to get that from them. Do seek professional help with them if they need to. You can also become involved in therapy with them if they so choose. And don't assume that the youth will be all right alone. Continue to check in on them. And again, take the means of suicide away. Don't handle the situation by yourself either. When a student is suicidal, a youth is suicidal, then the rules change in the sense that you need to tell somebody, and don't do it alone. Don't assume that just because the youth is seeing someone for help that your support is not necessary. And this is super important for us in our churches and youth groups. Just because so-and-so is getting counseling doesn't mean that your involvement in their life is not important. They need that day-to-day or connect, and because relationship to them is very, very important. So our first line of defense could always be prevention. And there is much we can do in the area of prevention. You will hear so much more if you're trusted by the youth, and they know that you are safe to talk to. More education is also so very important for prevention. So sharing this information with your church and others that you are connected to. Stigma is a major barrier, and it keeps kids from talking about it, and they might feel that they are just weak or a loser or no one really cares or gets what they are going through. They really need to know that they are valued. They also don't want anyone to know, so that you need to keep their trust by not talking about them to others inappropriately. So letting them know that you need to ensure that they get some help, and but if they're in an unsafe way, that you can't keep that a total secret, as we had talked about. And also, again, try to broaden the support network for that youth. That is very, very important as well.
Okay, so how can we help as adults within the congregation? How can we help? Again, it's about being there and being safe, being trusted, having a good relationship. So building relationships with teens is so important. Listening, much more than talking. Really wanting to understand and to validate what they're feeling. So validating is saying, yes, that must be horrible for you. Helping with overwhelming emotions. There's a lot going on, and they may be just overwhelmed with what's going on. So trying to ground them and be with them. Give them opportunities to ask questions, like, you're okay. You're okay asking and trying to listen and answer difficult questions. Opportunities to tell their story are really important. They have a story to tell about what's going on in their life, and we need to hear that. Teach some coping skills. As adults, we can say, well, I've done this kind of thing, and it's helped me, so this may help you, but not being lecturing. Find existing strengths in the teens. That's so important. They have so many strengths, abilities, and gifts that they can use to fight and to be stronger individuals. And of course, always integrating the word and prayer into this process. Spiritual component is so important. Although, like I said, in a state of depression, very hard to concentrate on the word. And God seems very distant. Even though he's not, the feeling is he's not there. He's not answering my prayer. So we need to pray for them and with them. So our main goal is to help them cope well, build resilience and strength, and then grow, therefore helping them make more sense of their world. Their world is chaotic at that time, so we need to help them to do that. And then how, as a church family, can we be helpful? Well, these are some ideas for our churches to be more helpful, but I'm sure some churches are doing very well in this area, and we can share more together on what might be helpful. But there's always room for some improvement. So some of the action we're suggesting is to support the youth programs, youth workers. Be interested. Let the youth in your church know that you care about them. You want to know what's going on. Know your community resources. Again, these resources are going to be a lifesaver when you're in the middle of a crisis. You don't want to find out then what's available. Educate, like we're doing. Talk about mental health awareness. The more people that are educated about it, the more can help. Keep talking in this relationship. Keep talking with them using I statements, direct, clear, simple language. And most importantly, keep listening. Much more important than talking. Remember the LEAP acronym to listen, empathize, agree, and partner. We also need to help them through their confused thinking. So encourage and support their treatment, because that will help them. They need to know that you're standing by that as well. Work as a team. Don't go it alone. This isn't a Lone Ranger kind of activity, so have some support for yourself as well. Set limits and boundaries. You need to take care of yourself, and you know your own limits. And most importantly, and we've been emphasizing this a lot, is the importance of staying connected, staying involved, keeping some contact with the youth in that relationship. That's so important to them.
And then finally, and so very important, is to extend hope to our youth, and also to the parents of the youth. So when people have lost hope, we need to be hopeful for them, hold their hope for them, hold the love of Christ to them, be hopeful for them, believe deeply in the power of Christ's healing for that person. They don't feel that at all, and we need to emphasize that for them. And then pray for that person. You can pray for them on your own. You can pray for them with the person if that's okay with them. Pray with their families, and then, as we always say, be the hands and feet and mouth of Christ to these kids. So I guess we would just allow, if you would just allow me to close in prayer with you and pray a blessing. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with the hope by the power of the Holy Spirit as you influence and help develop the youth in your sphere of influence. Here are some of the resources for more information. It's not exhaustive, of course. You can also email June or I and to ask questions and or to have more information. Before I hand it over to Kim, I just want to thank you on behalf of both June and I for joining us today, and then we hope that this has been really helpful to each one of you who is listening, and hope that it's just a beginning of a time where you will explore even more. There's lots more to talk about in terms of youth and depression and suicide. So I'll hand it over to Kim to see if there's any more questions.
Okay. I've seeing a request from the audience wondering if a slide of the resources can be emailed. I just want to remind our audience that we're going to have slide handouts in PDF format available with the recording, and the recording will be available within about 24 hours. And so that PDF of the resources will be available in that handout that we make. It's 2 slides per page. You'll be able to read those from there. So thanks for the question, and thanks for the opportunity to address that. I'm going to take our first question off of the registration form, and Winnie, I'm going to toss this one out to you. Mm-hmm. Someone was asking, how can this issue be addressed from the pulpit?
Fantastic question. We really need our pastors to be informed and compassionate in their delivery. We have sermons. There are sermons listed on the CRCNA Disabilities website. There are stories of truth and grace in that on that website as well. We also have all kinds of material on our website, Faith and Hope Ministries.net. There are lots of passages in the Bible that addresses these kinds of issues. We've used Psalm 88, we've used Psalm 42, Lamentations 3, and I'm not sure if it's John 6 or John 9, I can't remember offhand, but where the blind man says, so why, or not the blind man, but the disciples say, why is this person blind? And Jesus says, that's the wrong question. So when we talk about our youth and or our friends that are depressed or suicidal, the question is not why. The question is, so what can we do to glorify God in this situation? And remembering then that the God of all comfort is with these people. And also one of the things that we haven't talked about is pastors talking biblically about the depression, but also understanding that it is very much a biological thing, that it affects the brain. And we haven't talked a lot about that, but that is also, in fact, an understanding that pastors need to be informed, I guess, in their delivery. think that's all I can say. If people want to know more about that, we have done all kinds of services. We have litanies, and there's sermon samples. All right. Is there anything else, Kim?
Yeah, I was on mute. We've got a live question from our audience. I'll let you decide who answers this one. What do you recommend when parents see the situation with a youth, don't see the situation with a youth in the same way? Is there a recommendation for how parents can better communicate? For example, when one parent desperately wants to build a relationship and the other one believes in setting boundaries, keeping accountable. When the parents aren't in agreement, what suggestions do you have for getting them on the same page when they address these situations with youth?
So we're talking about a couple, parents, mom and dad kind of question.
Mom and dad have a situation with a youth, and they're not on the same page. One wants to build a relationship with the youth, and the other one wants to hold the youth accountable and keep boundaries set and so forth.
Right. Okay, and that can be very hard.
Okay.
Because the youth needs both, okay, understanding, but also boundaries. They do need both. However, if they're showing signs of depression and or suicide, again, we need to emphasize that this is a situation that is a medical situation. It affects the biology. We can see it in the brain. So we need medical help. And often we think, well, let's just, come on, just move. Let's get going, right? Get up and do something. Well, it's not in a youth who is depressed, or anyone who's depressed, it's not that they don't want to get up and do things. If there's depression involved, it's that they can't. Just like we can't expect someone to run who has a broken leg. There are things that just weigh them down. Depression just weighs them down, and it's very difficult. The energy is gone. So I think better understanding between both parents of what it is would be helpful. So if one of them feels they know a little more than the other, they could pull in some educational resources, talk to the pastor, talk to us. Faith and Hope will give them some more information about depression and suicide. And yes, it's a hard time if our youth is depressed or suicidal. And it's very easy for us to try and maybe deny that or say, oh, this isn't happening to my kid. But the precaution is it happens to so many that we need to be aware and be on the same page about this with our teens. And the church could help educate as well the parents, the couple, if they have some people in to do workshops or mental health awareness. That also would be helpful. And if I haven't answered that fully, because it's a big question, please do email us or, check it out further with us.
Yes, and we're going to put your contact information up in just a moment. I'm going to take another question off of the registration form. A pastor was asking how to counsel a depressed or suicidal youth.
Okay, I'll take that one. Pastors are very busy. We know that. They are very busy, and ongoing counseling may be very difficult for a pastor. We also know pastors don't get a lot of training in seminary around these issues that are very pertinent. So it's important that the pastor get some education themselves. We also know people do go to the pastor in time of crisis, so we need to be prepared. But it doesn't have to be the final place that people go to. I think the pastor, it's very important that they have a good relationship and they walk alongside. But the counseling piece, they may need to refer. Referring to someone in the community, referring to a Christian counselor if they're available, would be very helpful. And then just following up with the person on that. Really, pastors need to encourage the treatment, the medical treatment, talk therapy. Those are the two Main ways that people can recover from depression is some medical intervention and some talk therapy or psychotherapy. So really encouraging pastors to do that and to find out who they can refer to in the community, not to try and do it on their own. I would suggest, yes, they have a good referral base to draw from.
Okay.
If I might add, Kim, we talked also about suicidal youth here. If the pastor deems that this child is suicidal, then that's a game changer, and that is when we go into that place of calling parents, calling 911 or anything like that. I just thought I'd add that. Sorry.
That's important.
Yeah, you did mention earlier in your webinar about not keeping a confidence if a life is at stake. That there are times to not be passing along, gossip or inappropriate communication, but we need to be appropriate, and when the situation calls for it, to speak up.
Right.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's webinar. I want to thank our audience for coming and joining us today. Winnie and June, I hope you had as good a time as you did last time presenting a webinar. We're looking forward to your next one. And thanks again. And there's your contact information. It's been up on the screen, and it'll be available. And I got a little bit of parting information for you. As was mentioned, that there'll be I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm mentioning it now. We'd like you to give your feedback about today's webinar. A brief survey is going to pop up. Just check the boxes and send it in. As always, we'd like to do a lot more with our webinars. If we could have presenters' faces on the screen, stream a little video and such like that, but we don't have that technology and bandwidth always available. We're in 3 different cities today, and we've done the best we can with the tools we've had at our disposal, and we thank you for your patience with our conference call situation today. You can continue the discussion on the network at network.crcna.org, and there's also a disability concerns section on the network, and it's full of resources. You'll see some from such as webinars such as this, along with other websites and links to important topics of interest. Ministry shares is how these are made possible. We thank the churches that support them because it makes possible nearly 25% of all the ministry that we're able to do together as a denomination. And we hope that you've liked this webinar enough to join us for another. We've got one coming up in a couple of weeks, Spiritual Care for Alcoholics, Addicts, and Their Families, presented by Tom Kratt. He's with Evergreen Ministries, CRC over in Hudsonville, Michigan. And this looks to be a very good topic, so we hope that you'll join us again in a webinar very soon. And we thank you for all of you for your kind attention today. Until we meet again in a webinar, God be with you.